I met a philosopher named Richard Sorabji in Oxford. It's funny because I would email all these people and be like, hey, I'm doing this crazy trip. I'm hitchhiking around. I want to meet you, blah, blah, right? And I would either get silence, like, who the hell are you? You're not even worth replying to. Or like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Let's hang out, you know? And this guy, Richard Sorabji, he was in his 70s, very well established at Oxford, extremely well respected. And he was like, oh yeah, of course. You're hitchhiking? Oh dude, come on. Let's grab lunch at Oxford, right? So he...
Hi, and thanks for tuning in to Ancient Greece Declassified. My name is Doug Metzger, and normally I host the Literature and History podcast, but today I'm going to be interviewing your normal interviewer. I first met Lantern Jack about 7 years ago, and since then we've gone on conferences together, we've gone on trips together, and we've helped each other out with a lot of projects over the years. Jack is an author, a PhD podcaster, a semi-professional tour guide, and although you might not know it from the thorough professional varnish of this show, a really fun and funny person to be around. So, Lantern Jack, welcome to your own show, man.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to this reversal.
Well, let's start with some questions that I think a lot of podcast listeners would like to hear you answer as a host. One of them is one that we get asked a lot as podcasters, which is, you started this podcast for a specific set of reasons, I'm sure. I know that you were in graduate school at Princeton studying classics. So what made you begin the show in the middle of graduate school?
Well, I was nearing the end. I think I had like 2 years left of the program. So I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, the distant light, but it was a very bleak light because it became clear to me and all of my cohort that there were no jobs waiting for us. For every one academic job opening, there were at least 10 applicants. So in order to have some options upon graduation, I thought I should maybe start experimenting. At the same time, I loved podcasts. I had recently discovered them. They had helped me. There were a lot of great Latin and Roman history podcasts that helped me pass my general exams.
Yeah.
But when I was looking for audible material for Greek stuff, there was nothing available. I like telling stories. I would often tell my fellow grad students in other fields things I was learning about from the ancient world, and they were usually enthralled by my words. And they would say, like, dude, you got to start a podcast. So all those things kind of came together, and I launched the podcast. And then upon getting the PhD, it was the most attractive project to me to keep pursuing, and here we are.
When Jack starts telling stories in real life, everyone tends to gather around and listen. It's a lot of fun. So do you have any subjects that you'd like to delve more into in upcoming episodes, areas that you'd like to focus on, presumably related to ancient Greece?
Yeah, I think much to my listeners' relief, I promise I will take a very big break from Plato when I finish this Republic series I've been working on for God knows how long. They say that your personal passions eventually come through in your own podcast, and I guess that's been the case because I started this as like an generic ancient Greece podcast, right? And then after a couple of years, I just got sucked into a series on Plato, which is my favorite author, and it turned out to be a much longer project than I anticipated. And a lot of my listeners are like, hey, come on, like, this is not a philosophy podcast. This is not a Plato podcast. This is an ancient Greece podcast. Like, give us the full menu that you kind of advertise. So I'm gonna finally close the chapter on Plato. And then the next big thing I want to explore is the theater plays of the classical Athenian period.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tragedies, there's a lot of comedies, there's some romances, as you have talked about on your podcast.
Yeah.
And those theatrical productions, not only are they very entertaining, very vivid, very exciting, just works of entertainment, but they offer us a view into the world of the Athenians that no other genre offers. Like we get to sit like in their movie theaters, if you will, and watch what they're watching and see all the different ideas that are floating around, all the different debates, the political debates, scientific debates, all that is coming into those theater plays. So it's a beautiful window into a lost world.
literature is always a terrific way to learn about cultural history, of course.
Oh
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
And to your credit, you almost can't go wrong with reading a lot of Plato. Plato never goes away. The more you know about Plato, the more you can understand subsequent intellectual evolutions that take place during the Hellenistic period and late antiquity and the Middle Ages. So everybody's grateful. Don't bash yourself. One question that I wanted to ask you is we both did doctoral degrees and dissertations and everything, and then went into podcasting. You were able to publish your doctoral dissertation as a book. Can you talk about that just for a second? I think because a lot of us are interested in the heavy duty work that you did toward the end of graduate school.
Sure. Well, my book is on Stoicism, or my dissertation was on Stoicism, which happened to be a very hot topic. Somehow the cultural moment aligned with my own research. I actually chose I chose Stoicism as my topic because I didn't like Stoicism. I liked Plato a lot. I liked Aristotle a lot. I liked the Epicureans.
Were you looking for a fight?
Kind of
Yeah.
the one school I just couldn't stomach
Yeah.
was Stoicism, and I was like, I am never going to learn about this very important school unless I'm forced to do it.
Wow.
So I did offer my thesis advisor kind of 3 proposals, and he liked also that one the most. But part of me having that on the table was that I wanted an excuse to be forced to learn about this school that I just didn't like that much. Okay. I've since come to greatly appreciate Stoicism. I'm not a Stoic myself. Life has taught me that, but I do think that it is an incredibly important philosophical school. I think that a lot of modern ways of thinking that people don't realize are 100% Stoic derived. For example, the cliche that I'm sure you've seen in like 50 movies, like, you are the sum of your choices. Have you heard that before?
Sure.
Okay, that's like 100% Stoic thing. That was never, at least in the Western tradition, maybe it was independently arrived at in other places, but in the Western tradition, like, nobody made those claims before.
Does it mean essentially you are what you do and not you are something?
Not even that.
Okay.
It's not because your choices may never actually translate into actions.
Ah, got it.
You could be tied up. You could have all your limbs amputated, but according to the Stoics, you still are the sum of your choices. And it's like, so you are, the only thing that you actually control in life are your choices.
Okay.
How you choose to react to the world, how you choose to think about the world, how you choose to feel about the world. And everything else is up to external things that are beyond your control.
Well, we have talked a lot about Stoicism over the years and how there is a fairly limited array of complete texts related to Stoicism, which results in the contemporary world having a certain sense of Stoicism that's not necessarily true. So can you give us a sense of what you would like to debunk about Stoic philosophy, if there's 1 or 2 things?
Well, the main thing is that Stoicism is a lot more than what it is currently packaged and marketed and sold to be. So there's kind of like a Stoic industry right now. It's largely a self-help industry, and
wow,
a lot of these popularizers of Stoicism. And by the way, good for them for doing this. Okay, I'm not like not talking trash about them, but they offer a limited perspective, which is that Stoicism is all about kind of what I said earlier, like the dichotomy of control. It's the essence of Stoicism is separating everything in your life into 2 categories: that which is up to you and which is therefore under your control, and that which is not up to you, that which is beyond your control, and then limiting your emotional attachment only to the former category, and not getting upset or worked up about anything that's beyond your control. Okay, and there's all of these techniques and mantras you can repeat to yourself, and habits you can practice, and principles you can adhere to help you maintain that dichotomy of control and therefore not get upset about things beyond your control. Okay, that is an important part of the ethics of Stoicism, and an important...
So how much of Stoicism is what you just described, which sounds like maintaining mental equipoise among the tribulations of life? How much of Stoicism is that, from what you know?
I mean, it's hard to say an exact number, but I would say not more than 20%. Because Stoicism is also... So it has ethics, it's got logic, and it's got physics, according to the ancient understanding of physics. So Stoicism is an entire world framework or framework for seeing the world that involves theorizing about the origins of the universe, the way the universe operates, why life forms exist
Yeah.
and how they operate, and then how we can logically discuss these things. And then there's the ethical question, how we can be good people and how we can be happy. And then among that last part, how we can be happy, there's this dichotomy of control. And that is what is packaged as the entirety of Stoicism today.
Yeah.
When there's everything else I just mentioned as well.
Well, I get the sense that you are joyous that people are working with that wonderful 20% of ancient Stoic philosophy, but there are probably moments when you grind your teeth a little bit because you think there's a lot more to this ideology too, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that a lot of take like any label of an ancient philosopher or school of philosophy, and it has been reduced to like a tiny little concept today. Like Platonic today just means non-sexual, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Right.
Epicurean today means like pleasurable, right? Or pleasure seeking.
Kynikos, cynicism.
Exactly. Cynical means just having. So all of these are actually represent entire worked out philosophical systems, but somehow us modern people, we've taken like one very, very, very tiny point out of like a three-dimensional object and we reduce the word to that.
It's better to know a tagline than nothing at all, but you're right. So to kind of zoom out a little bit, because predictably we've jumped to the subject of ancient philosophy and onto the subject of ancient Greece more generally. This has been your specialization for a long time, and there are probably other things more broadly related to ancient Greece that you would love to debunk, if possible. Does anything else jump to mind that you would just like to tell everybody? We've got it a little bit wrong, folks.
Yeah, there's a few. I think there's two big myths that I try to debunk again and again on my show. Number one, that ancient Greece was just a handful of city-states. So it's like Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Syracuse, maybe a few others, and that's it. When in reality, we now know that there were over 1,000 city-states. And
I didn't know there were that many.
Yeah.
Wow.
Over 1,000 Greek city-states. And then that's not counting Phoenician city-states like Carthage, Tyre. That's not counting Italic city-states, like Latin-speaking city-states like Alba Longa and early Rome. It's not counting the Etruscan city-states. So in reality, there's this massive ecosystem of city-states. And there are reasons why in the first millennium BC, this was like the only time in history where the city-state was a viable, sustainable, sovereign political model. It was not before, and it was never after that. And I think that there are reasons why that led to this explosion of experimentation, political experimentation, right? Like if you have 1,000 entities experimenting politically versus 10, you can imagine that the 1,000 experiments will yield many more interesting ideas than the 10 experiments, right? So,
of course,
when Rome swallowed up all of those political entities eventually, it also swallowed up the information that they had generated, the techniques, the social technologies, the types of constitution, and then we inherited that from Rome. So in a sense, a lot of the social technology that we enjoy in the form of republican government, constitutional government, rule of law, a lot of these things are products of this massive laboratory of experimentation that was the ancient world.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the first.
Great.
That's the first myth. The second myth is what really, my pet peeve is when historians or, experts on the ancient world speak very confidently about the ancient world. And I understand that because like they should be confident in the sense that they've done a lot of work to get where they are. But people that are listening to them who don't have PhDs in classics, they don't know how much is not known.
Right.
Right. And so, as I said, we have over 1,000 Greek city-states. We only have reliable information that can actually get you on the ground in any one of those states and imagine anything there for a few of them.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like a 99.9% information loss, right? So I think that with any claim about the ancient world, you need to make it very clear that there's a very large margin of error, that you might be wrong,
right?
That we still don't know X, Y, and Z, and this is like a starting point for future discussion, and this is not the final period.
Yeah. I've heard you say before in your show, based on this sample of data that we have, this is
Yeah.
what we know. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about you, and if we want to come back to the subjects of debunking myths about Stoicism or ancient Greece more generally, we can certainly do that. Um, I know that you were a physics major
Mm-hmm.
leading up to your turn to classics. So how did that happen?
How did I switch from physics to classics?
Yeah.
Well, I was fortunate enough to, or as I see it, fortunate to have gone to, I believe, the last major university in America that still has a compulsory great books program. So every incoming freshman has to read Homer, Hesiod, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Herodotus, Thucydides, and then Plato. And I was enjoying all those other guys, but when I got to Plato, it really struck a chord
Well, that was going to be my next question about a transformative reading experience.
In my soul, yeah. Well, I read this work of Plato's called the Symposium, which is a exploration of the question, what is love? And what struck me about the book is that, love is this very intangible, poetic, mystical experience that we all are familiar with it, but it never occurred to me as a 19-year-old freshman that one could investigate such a matter rationally, that you could rationally understand what something like love might be.
Yeah.
And yet Plato did that. And he gave me a rational sense of understanding of love. And it wasn't the kind of rational deconstruction and dissection that sucks the life out of a concept. It actually made me even more excited to experience love, to understand love, all that kind of stuff. So that blew my mind. I couldn't sleep after reading it.
Wow.
And I was like, I need to explore more of this stuff. This is something that I didn't know existed.
And you were about 20, right?
I guess 19.
19.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah.
So
what was the next step then? Because for someone like me, the idea of switching to classics at 19 or 20 sounds pretty challenging because I don't have a background in ancient languages. So how did that go about?
Well, the next step was to try to take ancient Greek.
Uh-huh.
And I actually I tried to take the so-called turbo Greek, like the super intense one semester version that covers all of Greek grammar, and I had to drop out because I was still taking like math and physics classes, and it was just
slow transition.
It was too difficult. So then I did take some ancient philosophy, so I got a little bit more of Plato, Aristotle, and then I tried again with a slower ancient Greek course, and that one I could actually follow.
Yeah.
And after after 2 years of exposure to these old books as well as the language itself, I felt like I had drunken enough from the fountain of the muses to know that I wanted to chill out in this garden for the rest of my life.
So one thing that your listeners may not know about you that I would love you guys to know about Jack is that he is he just takes particular pride in his ability to speak ancient Greek and speak Homeric Greek. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how that interest came to life, because you started reading Plato and you took a tough turbo Greek class. And really, you could have just learned enough ancient Greek to get by in analyzing Plato, but you kept going. And you ended up loving ancient Greek literature as well as ancient Greek philosophy, and then learning more Homeric Greek. So how did you do that, and what in you wanted to be able to speak it?
Well, I always had an instinct. I mean, my dad was a very talented learner of languages.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I think he spoke like 7 languages, including actually ancient Greek and Latin. He went to a classical high school, and he helped me learn French in middle school, and he taught me some techniques. And the most important thing is you got to practice. I mean, it sounds so banal and obvious, and yet it's something that is tacitly ignored in learning classical languages. So when you learn Latin or you learn Greek, you're asked to memorize the vocab, memorize the grammar, and then Now shut up and go home and write out the homework. You
Yeah,
know?
sure.
And I hate to say this, but most students now in the Anglophone world, where this is the teaching practice, most students of ancient Greek or of Latin don't actually know how to pronounce properly a lot of the words. So, okay, I had this instinct that something's missing in this education system. I need to actually have an active command of this language. And then I heard that there was this crazy guy in Rome named Reginald Foster, an American priest who worked at the Vatican, who wrote all of the Latin documentation of the Vatican. He was the official scribe under 4 popes. He even made the ATM of the Vatican have a Latin language option. And as actually my Greek teacher mentioned him first, and he said, his Latin is so good he could describe to you the structure of the Starship Enterprise in Latin. I thought that was very impressive that there is such a person who could do this, right? I was like, okay, this is a kind of education that I have never actually seen in academia, and I need to see this guy. I need to experience this. So I looked up how to join this program. He had a summer program that was free in Rome as long as you passed a quiz that he sent you by snail mail that he typed up on his typewriter, and you had to write in it in your handwritten answers and then snail mail it back to him, and then you'd get another snail mail acceptance letter or not,
delivered by someone in a cowl. No.
Yeah.
Sure.
On a donkey. Or pigeon. And he also wanted 2 reference letters from your teachers or whatever. So I went to 2 professors of Latin at Columbia, and I asked for references, and they're like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And I said, well, because I want to have an active language of Latin, active knowledge of Latin. He's like, but why? And I said, well, can you ever really know a language that you only have a passive knowledge of? And they're like, yeah, it's just a different kind of knowing.
Yeah. Wow.
So they did not appreciate what I was trying to do, and they were visibly disapproving of it, but they still wrote the references for me, which is all I wanted. So I went and I did the program, and it changed my life. I think I learned more in 3 weeks with Reggie Foster. It was a 2-month program, but he got sick, unfortunately. So I only got the 3 weeks. But those 3 weeks, I think, were more transformative in my classical language learning than years.
And this was just an extramural project that you sought out for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
yes.
awesome.
So then after I saw how much that deepened my knowledge of Latin, I thought, okay, I got to do this for Greek as well.
Yeah. How'd you do it with Greek?
Well, first I just found some other students who were interested in trying it.
Yeah.
And we tried to stumble our way through speaking some ancient Greek.
Yeah.
There was a guy who claimed to be like the ancient Greek version of Reggie Foster, this German, I think, high school teacher who had a program in Greece that was also a spoken ancient Greek program. I don't want to, badmouth him, but just to be completely honest, I mean, he wasn't as impressive as Reggie Foster. I'm grateful for him doing that program, and I did learn a lot, but he just didn't have that mastery.
Yeah.
Okay. But it was still a venue through which I met other people who are trying to revive this language to achieve an active knowledge of it. And it's funny because like in the first, that was a 2-week program, and each one of us, ambitious ancient Greek speaking wannabes, we came in there. What happens in these types of events, whether it's Latin or Greek, is you come in and everybody has a different like word cloud in their brain, right? And by the end, we all have the same word cloud. So in other words, imagine like 10 little bubbles of vocabulary, all merging into one big bubble.
Got it.
Through this practice and speaking back and forth. And so by the end of 2 weeks, we've each expanded our vocabulary by like 5-fold, and we all now know the same words, so we can speak with each other with much more fluidity.
Yeah.
And I'm just mentioning that as a cool kind of perk about this.
It sounds glorious.
Yeah.
I'm serious. It sounds like nerd Elysium.
Oh, yes, yes.
um, well, I want to move on to a different subject in a minute, but while we have you in the chair here, I just wanted to tell everybody that as a podcaster, sometimes my PhD is on 19th century realist literature, but I've covered a lot of antiquity. When I need help with pronunciation, I can send Jack a long list of words that I need help pronouncing, and he just turns on record on his phone and goes through lickety split. It doesn't matter, Latin, Greek, again and again and again. And so, can you describe to us, as somebody who has done a lot of spoken Latin and a lot of spoken Greek, maybe describe ancient Greek in 2 words and describe, say, Augustan age Latin in just 2 words, the pith of each of these?
Oh, God. Ancient Greek is precise and musical.
Wow.
And Latin, okay, now I'm going to piss off some people, okay, but just to be honest, what I think, and I think Reggie would agree with me here, Reggie Foster, who loves Latin more than anybody. I think Latin is efficient
Okay.
and managerial. It's great for managers, for CEOs, for dictators.
Well, I'd say most of that is fairly positive, the managerial aspect of Latin. So precise and musical, and you read a section of the Symposium that really was transformative for you. Can you give us an example of a moment when Plato is precise and musical in Greek, or anybody else besides Plato? And grab a lobe if you want. No pressure.
I'm gonna grab a and this is not scripted, and you'll see how long it takes. I mean, we'll see. I'm gonna grab
Okay.
an edition of Plato and see if I can find something.
Okay. I mean, this is why you have those puppies right behind you in your office all the time.
Okay, so I just pulled up the Republic because that's what's fresh in my mind.
Got it.
All right. And let's just go to the very first page. Okay, so the first line is Socrates speaking, and he says, I went down yesterday to the Piraeus with Glaucon, the son of Ariston, to pay my devotions to the goddess, and also because I wished to see how they would conduct the festival, since this was its inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the procession of the citizens very fine, but it was no better than the show made by the marching of the Thracian contingent. Okay, this is, obviously in translation, you lose a lot of the qualities of the original.
That's what I'm asking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I've actually never done this before,
Okay.
what I'm going to do with you now, but we do know from later ancient testimonies that, well, at least there's a story that somebody after Plato's death was rummaging through his papers, maybe a secretary or heir or somebody, and found like either a papyrus scrap or maybe even a wax tablet where they found this first sentence written in like 20 different versions.
Wow.
Which tells, now whether that's true or not is not as important as the meaning it conveys, which is that this is, somebody is telling us that Plato was the kind of guy who like practiced how a sentence sounded 20 times before getting to the version he actually liked a lot. Okay, so this sounds so casual, so conversational. I went down yesterday to the Piraeus with Glaucon,
Yeah, got
son
some
of
French fries.
Ariston, blah, blah, blah. But there's so many choices embedded in this sentence that you would not notice unless you know to look for them. Okay, so one thing is that the word order in ancient Greek does not matter. In English, if I say Doug kicked the ball or the ball kicked Doug, those are two completely different meanings.
Yeah.
But in Greek, those would be the same because I would write your name differently if you were the object or the subject of the action. And I would write the ball differently if it was the object or subject. So every word in a Greek sentence, just from its endings, which change, contains the information of what it's doing in that sentence. So the word order does not actually matter. So you can, think of all the permutations that you could rearrange the words of a sentence in, and you'd still have the same sentence, but you'd have a different rhythm.
Yes.
And you'd have a different series of sounds,
Yeah.
right? So one thing that is achieved by by this arrangement is that you avoid what's called hiatus. And
Okay.
hiatus is the Latin word for yawning, and the Greeks called it chasmodia, which means like yawn song or something. And it's this: if you end a word with a vowel and then you begin another word with a vowel, there's a lot of vowel things happening there. It sounds like you're yawning, like
Okay.
you
A
know,
mouthful of vowels.
yeah, like lo and behold, lo and behold,
Okay.
okay. So by rearranging the words, you can get rid of hiatus, and then you have a much more syllabic sentence, like da 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 da, instead of da da
Okay.
da, right?
Yeah.
So that achieves a certain and here we can see that there's actually, I don't think there's any instance. Okay, no, there are a few cases of hiatus in the sentence, but relatively few. Okay, so that's just one thing that you can notice. If we look at the last two words of that sentence, it's proton agontes. If you read that in the rhythm that's inherent in every Greek utterance, it's proton agontes, which is exactly how Homer ends every line of his
dactylic hexameter.
It's a dactylic hexameter where the final dactyl is two long syllables.
Wow.
So dun 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 dun.
Wow, I never knew that about anything.
Which is also how Sappho ends her verses.
Sapphics.
It's called the Adonic, because there's a poem where the handsome mythological figure of Adonis appears, and one of the stanzas ends with O ton Adonin.
Yeah.
So it's called the Adonic. It's also the way that every Homeric line ends, dun 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 dun. And here he's ending the first sentence with dun 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 dun. So it's a Homeric ending rhythmically to the first sentence of a book that will later attack Homer and banish Homer. Okay?
I remember.
So right away you see that, and it's interesting that if you look at Plato's late, and by the way, I've actually never noticed that before, because I've never tried to dissect
the epic beginning of the Republic, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. But I do know that if you go to Plato's latest, his final works, he actually avoids that Homeric rhythm, like the plague. If you map out all the possible rhythms you can end a sentence with, the Homeric ending, or the Adonic I just mentioned, is the least common one.
Sure.
So actually, he did follow his own advice in a sense later in life and de-Homerized his writing. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think at this point, it's just interesting because, Plato is taught as this anti-Homeric thinker.
Yeah.
And yet in the Republic, a work which severely criticizes Homer, we also see his love of Homer. We see that he's conflicted. He
still has some of the intoxication of poetry.
He truly loves Homer.
Yeah.
And yet he feels like, I just, based on my rational arguments, I cannot allow this.
That certainly seems to, you said ancient Greek was musical and precise, and there's some musicality at the end of that too, and the precision must come from the syntactic elasticity that you described that's just inherent in Greek.
And just the final point I'll make, as you know, the most important work of literary criticism from the ancient world is called On the Sublime by Longinus. And he calls Plato I think he calls him the Homerikotatos, like the most Homeric of writers. So here we can kind of get a sense of why somebody might think that,
Yeah.
So anyway, I could go on, but I think you're already seeing that there's a lot to.
I would love you to go on, but yeah, I'm not confident that everybody wants to watch us talk about Platonic syntax and language for a long time, but later over a beer. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about some adventures that you've had. We've gotten fairly into geek level classic stuff here, but let's talk about Lantern Jack for a second. One of the adventures that you've had, in addition to your many, many, many trips to Greece, is that you hitchhiked across the country. You've told me a little bit about that before, but I'd like to get you on a hot mic talking about those adventures.
Well, I think like many grad students, especially in the humanities, I went through what's called the 30-year crisis, right? You get there, and at first you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like I'm finally with a bunch of other nerds.
Yeah.
And we can all just be nerds together. and you make a lot of friends in the beginning, and then everybody disappears because they get swamped with work, and then you don't see them again until you get your PhD.
Yeah. The crisis of the third year. Sorry.
And I did love it in many ways at first. I was also very disillusioned about many things about grad school, which we need not dive into. Long story short, I just didn't know what I was doing in the third year. And I was lucky to have a very understanding and wise advisor. And he told me, he's like, look, just take some time off. Just, clear your mind, leave.
Cool.
And if you want to come back, come back. So I literally bought a travel backpack and loaded it with stuff. And I had this idea. I'm going to travel the world without money. And I looked up online, I just Googled that, like travel the world without money. And I found that there were people that do this. And there were people that do this that talked about it on YouTube. And so it was possible. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I was like, if they can do it, I can do it. And then on the day I was going to set out, I just, as an afterthought, I grabbed my violin on the way out. I didn't plan to take the violin. I just took it.
You played classical violin growing up?
I was classically trained.
Yeah.
And then a few days later, I realized that I could use the violin to make some money by busking on the street. And so it ended up being like the gas in my engine. Like I traveled, I got from the East Coast to the West Coast without using an ATM a single time. Just living off of what I got with the violin and staying with people I met along the way. I did a lot of couch surfing. I also planned my route to go through places where I knew people.
Mm-hmm.
Rode with a lot of truckers. Really cool people, by the way.
Of course.
They get a bad rap, but they're super cool.
Hey, they listen to our podcast, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, did you meet anybody? Sorry, this is a question that I kind of know the answer to, but did you have any formative meetings during your hitchhiking adventures?
Yeah, so I didn't talk about what was my goal. And
okay.
Since I was confused about my own life and what I was doing, I wanted to meet people who knew what they were doing and whom I admired and whom I could therefore use as models for what I should do with my life. And so I started, before I actually set out, when I was still looking forward to the end of my fourth semester when I could take time off, I started making a list of people I'd like to meet in the world. And I would ask my friends in grad school. By the way, I got to say this funny story, okay?
Yeah. I
asked a bunch of fellow grad students, I said, imagine that during fall break, that an earthquake swallowed up the university.
Yeah.
Nobody was harmed. Everybody was away for vacation, but like the entire university was swallowed up in an earthquake, and you were forced by this event to abandon your graduate studies and seek another path in life. How would you feel? Without exception, they all said I would feel exhilarated and excited and liberated.
Really?
And then I would say, okay, but now imagine that the university is not destroyed. Why don't you just leave?
Yeah.
Like, well, because I got to finish this, I got to.
So they would have no moral conflict about leaving if the university magically vanished.
Exactly.
But then they would have to, I got it. Yeah.
And I felt the same way. And eventually I decided to come back and finish the PhD.
Yeah.
But, I also would ask them, if you could sit on a bench for half an hour with anybody in the world today.
Yeah, today.
Who would it be? And everybody, all of my peers in grad school, were able to come up with many names of dead people, but they had a very hard time thinking of anybody who was still alive.
It sounds like us antiquarian academics. No hard feelings. I understand, but yeah, I don't know what jumped to my lips either. That's interesting.
But I started compiling a list, and and some people gave me good ideas, and the list grew, and then I
people to meet.
Yeah. And these were not just academics. They were all, for example, one of the really interesting people I met was a musician named Jason Webley, who now does whose music I use for the podcast. The theme song of AGD is a song
you still find Orpheus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sing Orpheus is a song by Jason Webley that he has very generously allowed me to use royalty free.
Wow.
So I met like writers, I met musicians, I met a movie director down in Chile. That was probably the best of all the stories. Too long to get into. I met I met I met philosophers. Actually, I can tell you how this trip ended.
Okay.
I met a philosopher named Richard Sorabji in Oxford, and it's funny because I would email all these people and be like, "Hey, I'm doing this crazy trip. I'm hitchhiking around. I want to meet you." Blah blah. Right, and I would either get like a silence, like who the hell are you? You're not even worth replying to, or like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. Let's hang out." And this guy Richard Sorabji, he was like, in his 70s, very well established at Oxford, like extremely well respected. And he was like, "Oh yeah, of course, you're hitchhiking. Oh dude, come on, like let's grab lunch at Oxford, right?" So he he has me over at Oxford. He takes me to like his college and the dining hall there, and we happen to be sitting right next to, who's that guy? I think his name is like something McGee, maybe Brian McGee, like the guy that did these old BBC or British television interviews with the famous philosophers of the 60s and 70s. Anyway, he happened to be like right next to us. It was a cool meeting. But I asked, I had a fantastic time with Sorabji, and at the end, we were just walking around campus. He wanted to show me like one of the old libraries, and I was like, "So who was your greatest mentor as a young scholar?"
Yeah.
And he was like, I never had one in particular. And I was kind of shocked because everybody, all the important writers or scholars who I had read about or talked to, usually had like one formative mentor, right?
Yeah, you often hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was like, "No, I just learned from people wherever I was. Like when I was at Cornell, I learned from this guy and that person, and when I was at Oxford, I learned from these people, and when I was at whatever, and that kind of just made something click in my mind.
Yeah.
I had this moment where I was like, okay, I've just spent over a year, actually almost 2 years, trying to meet inspiring people, probably subconsciously trying to find a mentor.
Maybe to some extent, sure.
And I realized, I don't actually need a mentor. I don't need a shining light. I can learn from people as I go.
Yeah.
And that kind of gave me the closure to wrap up this trip, pack my bags, go back to Princeton.
Put your bow tie back on.
Shut up and write the stupid dissertation, which is what I did.
So we are both PhDs that ended up leaving academia, but still really like academia. What do you miss the most about it?
Well, for one, college campuses tend to be beautiful places.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, just open spaces, beautiful trees, quiet walks. There's a nice vibe to it. People are there to learn, not to make money. I love the faculty lounge chats.
Yeah.
I love the really nerdy drunken conversations over beers in the evenings.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah.
And I love teaching. I love teaching in person. I do, in some ways, I prefer the podcast because I have thousands of students instead of 5.
Yeah.
But there's something nice about the in-person interaction with students.
Yeah. Let it be known, listeners of Jack and some of you of me, we are very gregarious people and we like to party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why I like the tours that I run.
Oh, yeah.
Which you have graced with your presence twice, because there we get to meet people that listen to our podcast in person. And
Yes.
They never shut up with their questions, but it's a lot of fun,
What question would you prefer not to be asked ever again related to anything ancient Greece or the podcast, if there are any?
Well, I feel like since you're asking, you have one.
No. Honestly, maybe you feel the same way I do. Like, I'm happy if anybody says anything to me or pays any attention. It's like, thanks, man. Thanks for acknowledging me.
I don't know. I mean, I also like I got to say, when I go on these tours, I'm with people, all of whom already like me before I even meet them.
Yeah.
Which is a surreal experience. I mean, being growing up a very nerdy kid, I was never very popular. So like to suddenly be with all these people who are curious about what I think is kind of, it's flattering. It never annoys me. The questions don't get annoying.
you've mentioned this on your podcast several times, but you've hosted 4 tours. You've got a 5th in the works that we can talk about.
Yeah.
Why don't you just talk about what it's like on a tour bus? And this is intrinsically interesting, even if you never come on a tour. It's just kind of a unique environment to experience.
So the tour format is I pick a theme. Last time it was Persian Wars.
Yeah.
Before that, it was Enemies of Athens. It has to be a theme that's intriguing to me, because if I'm not excited to learn about this stuff, I'm not going to put in the hundreds of hours of work that needed to organize it.
Right? And I've heard Jack say before on tours, "Oh, I've never been here before."
Oh yeah, all the time. So I put together a curriculum. That sounds so dry.
Hey, that's fine.
Okay, I put together an itinerary. Okay,
a bar crawl.
Yes. And I try to make it include things that you would never get on a tourist guide, like a touristic experience. So, for example, I've always wanted to see that the surviving strip of the proto-railroad that the Corinthians constructed across their narrow strip of land from one sea to the other sea. And what survives is you were there. What survives is 10 feet of 2 ruts in the ground.
It's still pretty awe-inspiring in its own way.
In the middle of a quite industrial area that when we told the bus driver to stop there, he was like, "What are you guys doing here? Nobody comes here." But then then we see it. It's something that nobody goes to see. I've never seen it. And then we also have my partner Aristotle there, the archaeologist, who's able to explain no. So you see over there that hill. This went around that hill over there, and they could carry a whole ship on these tracks, and it's all brought to life. And then we get all back on the bus, and we have an hour drive to the next destination. And so we're chilling on the bus. We're talking about different ideas. Sometimes there's people with instruments, you brought a guitar.
Oh yeah.
We had this fantastic violinist on the last tour. I also play some instruments. So there's some silly songs. There's some philosophical debates. There's just a lot of jokes. Last time we did story time, where because there's a microphone on the bus, right? And the front of the bus is a microphone. So we would take turns, kind of doing open mic night on the bus, right?
On longer drives. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great time.
Yeah. Jack plays bouzouki, and he will play bouzouki on the bus, and it's just a lot of fun. Yeah. So many of the folks out there listening have maybe been to Greece themselves. Jack has been a lot, although born and raised American. Can you tell us about something that you did in Greece that was maybe off the beaten path a bit, that was just really special and maybe taught you about antiquity, or just a funny story?
There's a lot of times where I went looking for some ancient site off the beaten path, and then just met some really curious locals that had stories to tell.
Yeah.
So an example is I remember when I was doing this study abroad in Greece, I was on the island of Crete, and I had a friend from America visiting who was also a classics student. And we decided that we wanted to find this Hellenistic era bridge. Very few bridges survive from antiquity.
Bridge,
yeah,
huh?
It's 300. It was built in the 3rd century BC over a very small creek. It was not actually a full arch. It was like a kind of triangular structure. But it was a bridge of stone that was still standing after 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen an ancient bridge, so we decided to go find it. But it's just a little bridge, right? No tourists don't care about it. There's no there are no signs pointing you to it. So we had a rental car, and we went to the nearest village, and I got out and started asking people, "Have any of you heard of a really old bridge around here?" And people were like, "What? No." And then one guy was like, "Oh yeah, I know where it is. I'll take you." And before we can say anything, he's walking over to our car and just opens the door and gets in. Sits in the passenger seat. So my friend then sits in the back, and I start driving, and he's like, "Okay, now go over here. Okay, turn into here." I'm like, "Wait, there's no road." There's do what I say. It's a road. So we go down this goat path, And we finally get to the bridge, and by that point it was like getting dark, but we found the bridge, and the whole time he was telling us stories about his life, and Greek people love to talk about the suffering they've gone through.
Okay.
I feel like tragedy is not just a Greek genre; it's in their DNA. So he told us about all the tragedies of his life, and he's like, "Yes, I too have suffered. I too have come to experience this." But it wasn't just gloom and doom. He was like, "Okay, now, I just finished distilling some fresh brandy. You guys have to come and have a shot before you leave." So then we go to his house, and he has this like galvanized copper cauldron that he has just cooked up some moonshine in, and we drink a bit and then thank him and go on our way. And that's actually not atypical. That kind of stuff happens in Greece. If you get off the beaten path, if you're not afraid to talk to locals, if you show a curiosity about their culture, they will open up their homes to you.
Well, you are not a shy person, that's for sure. You're always willing to talk to anybody during your travels, which is why it's fun to travel with you too. So your listeners who have been out there the past, how long has it been that AGD has been going on?
I think it's like 7 years now.
7
as long
years
as I've known you.
Yeah, we met pretty quickly after you started.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like them to know about you? Fun stuff, real stuff?
Well, I'd like them to come meet me in person, sign up for a future tour.
What's going on? What do you got cooking in the Ancient Greece tour pot?
We're thinking of doing it in Crete. So I would call it the Minoan tour for marketing purposes, although like all my tours, it's not focused on one thing only. So the great thing about Crete is that it's a small island, and well, it's the biggest Greek island, but it's small for American standards. I mean, it's like maybe it's a bit bigger than Long Island. Despite not being a very big island, it has the geological diversity of an entire continent, if you can imagine that.
Wow.
It's got like two separate little mountain ranges that look different from each other. It's got this huge plateau on the east of the island. It has various valleys in between. It's got like the only palm forest in Europe at the eastern tip, and it's got like this really weird colored beach on the western tip. I mean, it has one of the biggest canyons in the world. I think it's number 3 after the Grand Canyon. And then historically, it's got Minoan stuff, Mycenaean stuff, archaic Greek stuff, classical Greek stuff, Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, and it has a lot of Venetian, Italian stuff because during most of the time, or during quite a bit of the time that the rest of Greece was under Turkish rule, Crete, being an island, was controlled by Venice, and so was actually under Venetian cultural influence. So in a sense, Crete was experiencing the Italian Renaissance, while the rest of Greece was under Ottoman feudal occupation, and so you have Venetian castles, you have Ottoman castles, you have Byzantine churches, Roman stuff. I mean, going back to the Mycenaeans and Minoans, and we're gonna see all those things because again, it's not that big. You can see everything on a tour.
And Aristotle can take you, the tour guide Aristotle, who has a wonderful name, can take you through each of these periods of history.
What people don't know about Aristotle is that he is obsessive and does his homework.
Yeah.
So he's like super prepared for all these things.
He prepares excellent historical nerd jokes too, which are fantastic puns. In the midst of these historically edifying adventures, how do you feel about your tour guests drinking alcohol on the beach?
It's fine with me. I'll subsidize it.
Before we go, I want you to tell us about a classical author that you wish was read a bit more often. And on the flip side, a classical author whom you wish was taught a little bit less often.
We're doing Greek or Latin here?
I'd love to do both. Let's stick with Greek.
Well, and I mentioned earlier that I want to explore theater, and I want to explore all of the 3 tragedians that survive: Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. But the one that gets almost all of the airtime in modern discussions, theatrical productions, and university courses is Euripides. Everything is Euripides. and he's considered the most sophisticated, the most readable, the most understandable, the most modern, all that kind of stuff. And Aeschylus is considered this like abstruse, weird, underdeveloped, difficult author.
Even in the time of Aristophanes, he was being made fun of as old and cobwebby.
But I think that, so I think Euripides it gets way too much attention.
Okay.
Aeschylus gets too little attention. And I have a story about this.
Okay.
So my advisor at Princeton, Christian Wildberg, great guy. He's a philosopher. I mean, 100%. But he's also a great scholar with a broad range of interests. And apparently, somebody I know who went to Princeton like 10 years before me told me the story that he started. He entered a course taught by my advisor way before I knew he was going to be my advisor, and it was on philosophy. But in the first class, Professor Wilbrix asked the students, like, what is the greatest work of ancient Greek literature? And they were like, I don't know, like the Republic? He's like, nope. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics? Nope. Or sorry, no. He said, what is the greatest work of classical era?
Just plain old, the whole era.
So 5th and 4th centuries BC.
Okay.
And so they went through like, Herodotus, no. Thucydides, no. Plato, no. Aristotle. It's like, come on, guys, he said, finally, exasperated. It's the Oresteia by Aeschylus.
Wow, I wouldn't have expected that. So what did he say?
Well, I don't know what he said because I wasn't there. And then when I told him like 20 years later that I heard this story, he was like, oh, did I say that? Yeah, it makes sense. So he couldn't remember that he said it, but it struck him as true.
Yeah, so what about the Oresteia, do you think?
Well, there's something about, and this is something I got to talk about in my current series on the Persian Wars, but okay. John Stuart Mill once said that if a civilization is destroyed, but the people are unharmed and they get to rebuild, it's actually not a bad thing for the civilization. And I would go one step further, and I would say if your like capital city is destroyed completely, but your people are unharmed and they emerge kind of in a good state and they get to rebuild, I think that's the best thing culturally that can ever happen to a civilization. Think Moscow and Russia after Napoleon. I mean, the flourishing of Russia's literature and poetry, everything started after Napoleon, right? I think the same thing happened to Athens. The fact that the Persians completely destroyed Athens, but the Athenians won, so they were not like killed off. They all survived. They all got to come back. They were all victorious. They had a lot of money now, and they got to rebuild everything. I think that was the best possible scenario that could have happened to them in terms of adding nitro to their cultural engine.
Wow.
And the excitement of being able to build everything again, bigger, better, with new technology, with new ideas, with new people coming from other places of the world bringing new skills.
Right.
Because Athens was attracting a lot of skilled immigrants, right?
New ways of wealth redistribution after the wars. Yeah.
It was literally like creating a new world. And Aeschylus is writing at that time. He's writing at the time when Athens is being reborn with a lot of money, a lot of investments, a lot of cultural exchanges, and he's imagining a new world. And that is what the Oresteia is about. Even though it appears to be this very old Bronze Age story about the aftermath of the Trojan War and, Orestes. So Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon, gets a boyfriend while he's in Troy. When he comes back, she kills him. But then her son and daughter are pissed off that their mom just killed their dad, so they kill her, and then a lot of bad things ensue, typical Greek tragedy. So it might look like from that Aeschylus is telling this very twisted, dark, myth from hundreds of years ago.
Unending family revenge, right.
But that's not at all what the play is actually about. What the play is actually about is, and it's going to sound crazy at first, but what it's really about is how Athens is a new kind of civilization that is departing from the twisted world of feuds and an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, all kind of stuff. And the third play in that trilogy is it involves the formation of a kind of pseudo-democratic court, which is totally anachronistic because that did not exist in the actual time of Orestes.
Okay.
It's a fiction that what it's communicating to the audience is, look, we are now a new civilization. We have a blank slate. We are going to do things in a new way that's more ethical. We're going to have a bright future.
Yeah.
We're not going to have the twisted, endless blood feuds of the past millennium.
Yep.
It's the most optimistic.
It is.
And exuberant and enthusiastic and inspired of all tragedies, I think. And yeah.
I think sometimes when we study history, we focus too much on the sad bits, the wars, the catastrophes, the revolutions, and a play like the Eumenides at the end of the Orestean trilogy, which is 458 BCE, it is just one of the most surgingly happy and optimistic endings that I've ever seen in any literature ever. And so I love that trilogy as well.
Yeah.
And I suppose we can end here just by saying that as you move forward, you plan to explore more Greek comedy and tragedy of the 5th century BCE with fantastic guests, and your audience can learn more about these plays in upcoming episodes.
I do, and I would love to have you back.
Sure.
You have a depth of knowledge and a depth of comparanda, of things to compare. And I think that to have you back as a guest on one of these explorations of a play would be great if you're up to
I'd love to. I mean, I have a lot of enthusiasm for the subject, that's for sure.
Awesome.
So thanks again for coming on your own show and in your own home. It's very much appreciated that you can make the trek. And I hope you guys who are listening got a chance to get to know Jack a little bit better, and maybe we'll get to know him better in future tours.
Thanks, Doug.
You got it.